You fled a country destroyed by Western imperialism. Yet when you arrive in America, you align yourself with the very people who bombed your homeland while hating the Black Americans who never harmed you. Assalamu alaikum. I am Sista Samilah, and today we are going to discuss one of the most confounding, frustrating, and frankly insulting phenomena that I have witnessed in my lifetime. Immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and other regions who flee countries that have been devastated by American and European imperialism, only to arrive in the United States and immediately align themselves with white supremacy while directing their hatred and contempt toward Black Americans.
Members of the Black community don't want to hold people accountable, especially Black people.
Where are you from?
Where am I from? I live in Florida. I was born in Angola, though. I was born in sub-Saharan Africa.
I'm not Black, I'm African. I came in a plane, they came in chains.
Barely even human.
This is not just cognitive dissonance. This is spiritual bankruptcy. This is a betrayal of logic, history, and the most fundamental teachings of justice that exist in every moral tradition, including Islam. Let me lay out the facts so that we are all operating from the same foundation of truth. The United States and European nations have spent centuries pillaging, exploiting, and destabilizing countries across Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. They did not just engage in colonialism, extracting resources and enslaving populations. They systematically destroyed functioning societies, installed puppet governments, assassinated democratically elected leaders, funded civil wars, imposed economic sanctions, dropped bombs, and created conditions so unbearable that millions of people had no choice but to flee their homelands. In Africa, we saw the Berlin Conference of 1884, where European powers literally sat around a table and carved up the entire continent with no regard for ethnic boundaries, cultural ties, or historical realities. They drew arbitrary lines that would ensure perpetual conflict, making it easier to control and exploit African nations for generations. When African countries began to gain independence in the mid-20th century, did the West simply leave them alone? Absolutely not. They assassinated Patrice Lumumba in the Congo because he dared to prioritize his people over Western mining interests. They supported apartheid in South Africa for decades. They destabilized Libya, turning it from one of the most prosperous nations in Africa into a failed state with open-air slave markets. They have exploited Nigeria's oil wealth while leaving the Niger Delta in environmental ruin. The list goes on and on. In the Caribbean, the United States has treated the region as its personal playground. They invaded Haiti multiple times, occupied the country, stole its wealth, and supported brutal dictators like Francois Duvalier. They orchestrated coups in Jamaica, Grenada, and the Dominican Republic whenever leaders emerged who prioritized their own people over American corporate interests. They imposed economic policies through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that crippled Caribbean economies, forcing countries into cycles of debt and dependency. In the Middle East, we have seen the United States and its European allies engage in regime change, fund extremist groups when it suited their interests, bomb entire nations under false pretenses, and create refugee crises that have displaced millions. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen. These are not just names on a map. These are countries where real people lived, worked, loved, and built futures, only to have everything destroyed by bombs stamped with "Made in the USA." So when immigrants from these regions arrive in America, fleeing the chaos and destruction that Western imperialism created, you would think that they would have some understanding, some consciousness, some moral clarity about who the real enemy is. You would think that they would recognize that the same white supremacist power structure that destroyed their countries is the same one that has oppressed Black Americans for 400 years. You would think that there would be natural solidarity, a shared understanding that we are all victims of the same system. But that is not what happens. Instead, many immigrants arrive in America and immediately align themselves with whiteness. They distance themselves from Black Americans. They adopt anti-Black stereotypes. They look down on us, call us lazy, blame us for our own oppression, and actively work to ingratiate themselves with the very people who dropped bombs on their grandmothers. They open businesses in Black neighborhoods but refuse to hire Black Americans. They move into positions of power and use that power to benefit their own ethnic enclaves while ignoring or actively harming Black American interests. They side with them folks, the colonizers, the imperialists, the architects of global white supremacy, all while directing their vitriol toward Black Americans who have never invaded their countries, never stolen their resources, never dropped a single missile on their soil. Let me ask the question plainly. Why would any victim of anti-Black racism, any person who has suffered under Western imperialism, choose to align with their oppressors? Why would you smile in the faces of the people whose policies forced you to flee your homeland? Why would you reserve your hatred for Black Americans, the one group in this country who has consistently fought against the very system that destroyed your country? The answer, unfortunately, is a combination of internalized anti-Blackness, strategic self-interest, and moral cowardice. Many immigrants believe that if they can differentiate themselves from Black Americans, if they can prove that they are the good kind of Black or brown person, then they will be accepted by white society. They think that by distancing themselves from us, by adopting white supremacist talking points, by showing that they too can look down on Black Americans, they will be rewarded with economic opportunity and social acceptance. But here is the cold, hard truth. White supremacy does not care about your immigrant hustle. It does not care that you speak multiple languages, that you have a college degree, that you work 80 hours a week. At the end of the day, to white supremacy, you are still Black, you are still brown, you are still foreign, and you are still disposable. The system will use you when it is convenient, weaponize you against Black Americans when it suits their interests, and discard you the moment you are no longer useful. You are not escaping oppression by aligning with your oppressors. You are simply participating in your own degradation while making it harder for all of us to fight back collectively. Now, let me bring this conversation back to Islam, because for those of you who claim to be Muslim, this behavior is not just politically misguided, it is a direct violation of Islamic principles. The Quran is abundantly clear about where we are supposed to stand in the face of oppression and injustice. Allah commands us repeatedly to side with good and to reject evil, to stand with the oppressed and against the oppressor, regardless of tribal affiliation or self-interest. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 8, Allah says, "O you who believe, be persistently standing firm for Allah as witnesses in justice, and do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just." Be just, that is nearer to righteousness, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is aware of what you do. This verse makes it clear that justice is not optional, it is not conditional, and it is not something you can abandon because it is inconvenient or because it conflicts with your desire to assimilate into an unjust system. You are commanded to stand for justice even when it goes against your own interests, even when it means standing against powerful people, even when it is difficult. In Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 135, Allah says, "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents or relatives. Whether one is rich or poor, Allah is more worthy of both. So follow not personal inclination, lest you not be just. And if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, then indeed Allah is ever aware of what you do." This verse is even more explicit. You are commanded to stand for justice even if it means testifying against yourself, your family, or your community. You cannot use tribalism, self-interest, or fear as an excuse to abandon what is right. And yet, when I look at the behavior of many Muslims from the diaspora, I see people who have completely abandoned these principles. I see people who are more concerned with proximity to whiteness than proximity to justice. I see people who will speak out against Islamophobia when it affects them, but remain silent or even complicit when it comes to anti-Black racism. I see people who will quote the Quran when it is convenient, but ignore its teachings when those teachings require them to sacrifice their own comfort or challenge their own prejudices. Let me be even more direct. If you are a Muslim immigrant who has fled a country destroyed by Western imperialism, and you arrive in America and align yourself with white supremacy while looking down on Black Americans, you are not just being hypocritical, you are sinning. You are violating the commandments of Allah. You are siding with the oppressor, and the Quran makes it clear what happens to those who do that. In Surah Al-Anfal, chapter 8, verse 72, Allah speaks about those who believed and migrated and strived in the cause of Allah, and those who gave them shelter and aid. These are described as allies of one another. But then Allah says in verse 73, "And those who disbelieved are allies of one another. If you do not do so, there will be fitna on earth and great corruption. The message is clear. You must align yourself with the righteous, with those who stand for justice, or there will be chaos and corruption. When you align yourself with oppressors, when you side with those who perpetuate injustice, you are contributing to fitna, to societal breakdown and moral decay. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Whoever among you sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand. And if he is not able to do so, then with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith." This hadith is a call to action. It is a command to oppose evil in whatever way you are capable. When you see injustice, when you see oppression, when you see racism, you are obligated to speak out, to take action, to resist. Silence is not an option. Complicity is not an option. And certainly aligning yourself with the oppressor is not an option. So let me ask again, why would any victim of anti-Black racism, any person who has suffered under Western imperialism, choose to side with them, folks? The only answer that makes sense is moral failure. It is a failure to understand history, a failure to recognize your true enemies, a failure to stand on principle, and for Muslims, it is a failure to live up to the teachings of Islam. Black Americans have been fighting against white supremacy, imperialism, and racial capitalism for 400 years. We have been at the forefront of every movement for justice in this country. We fought for the civil rights that made it possible for you to immigrate here in the first place. We have stood in solidarity with liberation movements around the world, from anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa to anti-colonial movements across Africa and the Caribbean. We have consistently aligned ourselves with the oppressed, even when it cost us dearly. And what have we received in return? Contempt, disrespect, betrayal. We have watched as immigrants from countries destroyed by Western imperialism arrive in America and immediately distance themselves from us. We have watched as they adopt the language and attitudes of our oppressors. We have watched as they prioritize their own ethnic interests while ignoring or actively undermining ours. We have watched as they smile in the faces of white supremacists while reserving their vitriol for us. Enough is enough. Black America is done being the moral conscience for people who refuse to develop their own. We are done extending solidarity to people who spit in our faces. We are done fighting for justice on behalf of people who turn around and align with injustice. If you want to side with them, folks, if you want to align yourself with the very system that destroyed your homeland, then that is your choice. But do not expect us to continue showing up for you. Do not expect us to defend you when white supremacy turns on you, because it will. Do not expect us to include you in our movements for liberation when you have made it clear that you do not see us as equals. This is not about division for the sake of division. This is about accountability. This is about recognizing patterns of behavior that have caused harm and refusing to tolerate them any longer. This is about demanding that people live up to the principles they claim to hold, whether those principles are rooted in Islam, Pan-Africanism, anti-imperialism, or basic human decency. To my Muslim brothers and sisters from the diaspora, I say this with love, but also with firmness. You cannot claim to follow Islam while aligning yourself with oppression. You cannot claim to be victims of imperialism while siding with imperialists. You cannot claim to care about justice while perpetuating injustice. Return to the teachings of the Quran. Return to the example of the Prophet Muhammad, who stood with the oppressed, who fought against tribalism, who elevated those whom society had cast aside. Fear Allah and align yourself with what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it costs you something. This is Sista Samilah reminding you that history is watching, Allah is watching, and one day you will have to answer for whose side you are on.